Die Woche mache ich auch ein Special File, nicht ein Emergency, ein Special File, wo sie dort über das Schuh.
Bei der Giddes Convention, ich bin 2 Frauen, wo sie dann gehad am Workshop, in seinen gekommen Darschenen, 5 Frauen, wegen Sexual Abuse.
Wieso man soll aufhieten Kinder, und wieso die ganze Community mit einer Gruppe, weil einer allein kann das nicht beweisen, und sie ist, da geht es sich schon hochgebeugen, sie haben nicht gar kein Breite, sie haben gewiss den Sommer gewinnen, und sie gehen Zures für die alle Sachen. Anyway, was ich will herausbringen ist, ich bin gefahren am Mond mit der Flieger, ich habe gedacht, fuhren zu machen, Mikve in Venezuela. Jetzt ist es so ausgekommen, hat der Flieger gespätigt 3-4 Schuhe, sie kennen es, es hat geheißen, sie geht Donnerstag, hat geheißen, es gelegt, ich kann machen, die Connecting Flight to Venezuela, und sie nicht du noch ein Connecting Flight nach dem nächsten in der Früh. In der kann sagen, kommt du schon spät. Ich bin ein Mensch, es hat gesessen in einem Flieger, gesehen, nach Siedischen Jid wie ich, hat gesagt, Tomer kennt ihr nicht machen, den Flight, Hand bei Nacht, man hat nicht machen, am Morgen dicke Flight, kennt ihr doch umkommen, Schabbat. Jetzt will ich auch sagen, ich habe, ich muss Sorgen bei mir in der Heim, es kommen, ich sage, Mensch, es ist ein größer Spitul dort in jener Stutt. Der Stutt heißt Memphis, Tennessee. Dort ist ein Bruder mit der Fette, von jener Bohnen, meiner ist schon gestorben, es ist kein Kind. Anyway, kommt er zu mir ziehen, sucht mir, als ich kenne, kommen zu ihm. Schon, der Kitzer, ist ein Vice-Präsident von einer Bank. Stell dir vor, eine große Position. Ist in Wells Fargo, ist ein guter Vice-Präsident von einer Bank. Sag ich immer wieder, ich verstehe mich ganz nicht mehr da. Ihr seid von der Welt, sie von jener Welt. Ich weiß, was geht vor mit Pedophiles, ich weiß, man molestet Kinder. Das ist noch kein Umfang, noch kommen mit 5 oder 6 Uhr zurück. So kennt ihr mich, rief und sagen, heimisch tief. Wann weißt ihr, wo ich gehe, du tief? Wann weißt ihr, wo ich fuhr, dort wie ich fuhr? How do you know me? I don't understand this. Lass mal vergessen, sie do Rapists, sie do alle Sachen. So du hast gemacht. How do you take a stranger off an airplane and tell him to come into your house? Fragen, do you have children? So yeah. So what are you, crazy? Am Azab gegeben, gewann reut in Punem in der Sabbe. Peter hat es verzeilt, das hat man ihn gemacht, wo sie dort mit seinem Sinn wegen der Vier. Und hat ihm gesagt, der weiß, in the beginning, when I heard him shaking him, I told him he is a wacko. He soll Scharalos nach jeden Stieb. At the end of the day, come ich to think of it, sagt dem jemand, ich kenne dich auch nicht. I don't know who you are, from where you are, kommst bei mir, ich host, du sitzt du Wochen, ich hab Kinder, ich hab Awab. You know what? Ich will dir geben, Geld soll gehen in ein Hotel. Ich will nicht, dass kommen mehr zu mir in Stieb. Because you know, I'm thinking that the rabbi in the airplane was right. Jetzt der Mensch hat sie mir kein Wunsch gerät nach dem. Weil hier Joim, der in Germany geheilt geworden, das heißt, gewinnt mit der Kind, das Kind geheilt geworden, weißt du, wo die Krankheit gewinnt. And at the end of the day, hat es über die Zeit für eine von meinen Kindern. Und hat es über die Zeit, nicht, dass ich bin nicht gerecht, aber ich bin noch mehr gerecht. Ja, natürlich hat er nicht gekannt. Du, der Meisels, dann habe ich so gefahren, gewohnt habe es 10 Jahre in der Village mit einem alten Golf von 60 Jahren. Ich gefahren einmal auf Kalifornien. Dort hat er gesehen in der Sicke, bei dem Ruf, dort regnet doch kein, es schneit nicht. Ich erklärt, es gibt Platz für ihn. Er ging in den Ruf, kalt mich und fragt mich, ich kenne den Mensch Meisels, weil will kommen anstehen bei mir in Sicke, bei Schabbat. Aber ich habe gesagt, der Mensch hat gewohnt 10 Jahre mit einem alten Golf. How are you going to take somebody like that in the house? Hat er mir gesagt, I thank you very much. Und er hat nicht genommen. Ich weiß immer, die nimmst daran strangers. You know who you're taking into your house? It's unbelievable. Anyway, ist später bin ich noch einmal da gefahren in Memphis. Aber ich habe gekallt den Mensch und ich habe mich introduced. Ich denke, der Rabbi Rosenberg, der Rabbi Rosenberg, you're the grand Rabbi of the world. You saved my house. I used to have nur zu sorgen, every time, dick and hairy. Jeder Zuria, wir kallt so, wir kallt Tumayla Nefesh, legt anstehen bei mir. And I realized that you were right. And he says, listen, if you ever want to open an account in Wells Fargo, ich bin der Vice President von der Bank, ich kann dir einfach einen Account. So ich bin sagt Ihnen, an Account in Wells Fargo down in Memphis, Tennessee. What am I going to do there? Anyway, so this is what the guide for. A community must fight as a whole. You can't fight alone. You fight alone, you lose. In dieser Burgschau geht in verreden 10 Jahre, als jeder halt schon mit. Halt mit jedes Mal noch und noch. Dem Hand sind bei uns Berg 10 in der Früh in Etzisruhe. Also ich hatte 2 Phone Calls für Motze Shabbos, in Amerika Motze Shabbos. Dann habe ich ihm glückliche Cases. Ist bitter wie Agap. In deze will ich nicht maßbar sein. The community has to work along. I said, du hast Problem mit Burgmotke Lebewitsch, mit Moshe Epstein. Die alle sollen nehmen als Sickescher. Weißt du, das heißt?
A Headstrimmer.
Sollen nehmen als Sickescher und sollen rausnehmen die Masse, wenn sie sagen, Kishi-Eiver, und sollen geben einen Hacker die ganze Masse, und sie puttern von alle Zures. That's what's gonna have to be, because the community in the schildig, als in Sommer a pur uncontrollable Chazayra. Der Meul hat sich nicht genick geschnitten, und sie geblieben zu lang. We're not gonna take this anymore. So, da geht es sich schon aufzugestellt. Hat sich einmal, haben sie mich gescholten. Mir gesagt, einer, was arbeitet in der Gide, der weiß noch, die darf es mal zu für der Gide größtes Geld. Was sie geht nicht durch 30 Tage. Geht nicht durch 30 Tage, was man redet nicht von dir. Bei uns bist du auf dem Table, jede pur Tag. Ist am Uhr, pflegen sie schelten. Und er sagt, aber Hand, it changed, the whole thing changed the face. Hand, läuft man dich, und man läuft dem Eibischter, geschickt das Aburischen Haus und alle Schamren. So, ich will es so sehen, du, eine Frau, sie hat gegründet, Magenia Ladin. Jede Tidbrach Hashem Hand in dem. Und sie ist professional. Und Mamaila ist professional, weißt du, wieso ich sitze ein zu der Sache. Und du hast bei mir gesucht. Menschen sind gründen an Organisation, sag ich will nicht aus, wenn ich Chemie Webermann. Because wir sitzen mit dem Eidl dreimuchel und ich wissen, was zu helfen. Die nächste Sache, ich gesucht, die der aus der Adresse. Das hat mich Chemie dit. Er hat schon geholfen, zu kommen mit dem Eidl, sonst host in der Adresse. It took time until he won them. Einmal als Zeichen gehabt gewinnen, sind Zeichen gewesen sein. We're not going to stand for all this gap. In professionals on teams, I have a job on a professional level. Und ich bin noch du, ich bin der CNN, der Fake News, die Trump rieft mich. Fake News. Leider nicht Fake News, alle Weiben sollten gewinnen Fake News. Ich will gehen als Sachschöner, als Sach mehr angenehmer. Wenn noch im Rosenberg will gehen, als Liegener, als Maschigener, als Fantasist, mit alle Namen hat es mir gekauft. Als Sachschöner gewinnen, besser gewinnen. Und es soll gehen als Sach besser, wenn du es liegend. Das ist eine unfortunate situation. Wenn es nicht kann liegend, leider. Jetzt müssen wir unheimlich zu arbeiten, nach Klallisruhe. Das ist ein größtes Problem. Jetzt lege ich auf.
Für einen Workshop, für eine Giddes Convention, dass 2 Frauen-Therapists reden.
Herauszuhelfen, zu machen Awareness. Eine moire dicke Sache. Ich will auch sagen, ich habe es darauf gelegt. Ich habe es darauf gelegt, nicht auf Manhattan, ich habe es darauf gelegt auf mein WhatsApp. Ich habe doch eine WhatsApp-Gruppe auch. Weil sie hat auch gesagt, dass der schon Chaser soll es rinnen auf der Boot. Ich stand in einem Restaurant, ich gefressen Chaser. Und ich gewatscht, der Boot soll nicht werden ungeflecktig mit der Chaserfett. Und so kennen das Chaser soll es rinnen auf der Boot. If you do it, do it. Nicht, dass ich sage, man soll es stehen, aber einer sagt, behalten nicht eine halbe Sache. Es ist dasselbe auch. Also Koschen, der Tumene Keil, aber ich schon WhatsApp auch. Das ist schon Achillig, aber ich schon das, aber ich schon Jens. Ist Le Masse, aber ich darauf gelegt, 2 Schuhe, oder was habe ich darauf gelegt? Ich habe es darauf gelegt, du bei uns, was du, Sintig in Netzesruhe. Wenn ich sie mitten in der Nacht, da kommen schon 3 Telefoncalls auf WhatsApp, aber noch you touched me, you touched my heart. Ich habe nicht zugeriert, so geliebt, ich bin 5.000 Mal weg. Also meint sie suchen, I really touched her heart. Anyway, ich muss auch wieder rausbringen mit dem ist, die Gedeimen soll es so sehen, und die Gedeimen soll einfach noch eine Sache in Wilhelmsburg. Eine Frau kommt mich gut, man lässt ihr sehen. Sie hört mich aus, aber die Mann tut nicht wissen. Und mit Meile hat sie gesehen auf die Symptoms, dass geht schlecht, bis sie ihm umgehen auszufragen. Und sie geworden, als somebody's fiddling with him. Bei dem will ich sagen, Rabbi sei, der Rabunen sind ein Drehtlige, so manch verfiert. Da sagen wir, tun nicht aussehen noch im Rosenberg. Sie sagen, Mitzvahs essen der Reise aussehen noch im Rosenberg. Sie schmarten mir Eudlen auf Scheichen. Sie sagen, wir tun nicht, lassen sie keinen Dreher. Man hat 50 Uhr nicht getuert, hier sind wir umgekommen. Anyway, ich halte mich auf ein Ruf auch, Er will machen Schulen zwischen der Rabunen, man soll mich überbeten, man soll Herren, so hier, sich mir dabei. 2 Sachen darf geschehen. Koiden darf man mich überbeten, aber so wie ich will. Soll sagen, als er mich gechappet, an Leudover, weil man zum Maschige gemacht. Und nicht, was hat ja drin, hat Troppel Emmes. Nicht soll heißen, als ja, ich habe ein bisschen Schiebe getan. Seid ihr ein bisschen Schiebe? Nein. Sie haben gechappet, noch im Rosenberg, an Leudover. Der zweite, wir sagen, soll machen ein Change of Policy. Also wie der Gid hat jetzt gemacht, ein Change of Policy. Sie sehen, wir können nicht mehr behalten. Ich weiß, ich nehme 1000 Disclaimers, na Giddes Yisroel ist auch gewinnen, war aufzubehalten, der Ziege, wo sie gewinnen in der Yeshiva. Und sie kommt jetzt heraus. Es kommt alles heraus, auf viele Weise gewinnen war. Und jetzt gehen wir sich entschlossen. Die Menschen fragen, was Maschige 30 Uhr zurück, was ist da herangelegt, drin so, ich kann nicht sie kicken, den Picture von dem Kind, kick tun das Kind, was sie sieht aus. Eine soll mir sagen, wenn eine Tat oder eine Mama verliert, dass ein Kind, kann sich Meuchel sagen? Nein. Ich hab mich als dem Rezeichen, ich mir setzt den Mann, schon weiter beruhigt. Ich hatte nicht das Kind, aber in derselben Zeit, jener hat auch nicht kein freies Leben. Aber nehmen, dass die Yeshiva soll machen, als Schweig, soll nach Hause gehen, soll schon mit keinem, mit keiner anderen Yeshiva, soll unhalten sein, als Scheigetstück. Mit Quatschungen mit keinem für Long Beach. Na, hab ich gesagt, also, ich arbeite in dem Jahren. Hab ich schon gesagt, auf Matlein noch 10 Jahre zurück in Apur Moloche. Die Menschen haben sich umgeriefen. Menschen müssen gehen warm, zu helfen, haben sich umgeriefen, so mitgearbeitet. Tisch und Bein. Es ist durchgegangen jetzt die ganze Community. Man sieht auch viele, wenn man geht, sitzen die 2 dabei. Einer ist hier, nimmt zur Yeshiva, und der andere, wo sehr heißt es, supposedly, ich will nicht sagen, raus vom Amola, du bertumme, als es gewähnt, Chaswe Schulem soll man nicht kommen in Betracht. Als hat gewiss, oder noch mehr ein bisschen. Anyway, I don't know anything, don't talk in front of the camera, I don't know anything. Das ist der Chitzpes der Rosh Hashiva. Sog ich dem Rosh Hashiva, du wirst mich überbeten, ist die erste Sache, müsste sagen, jetzt hat es getein an Abla Leute über, haben wir den umgedreht. Und die zweite Sache, müsste sich stellen, voll Haare, den geben einen Brief, was wir missgehen zu der Polizei, und sie sollen sie helfen, Tommen mit zu brauchen, nützen. Und sie sollen tun alles, was man kennt, zu verrechten, die Weire, mit Ugehaarget, zählige Tausender Kinder in einer Million Schummes, rechnen aus. Als mein Tate ist geblieben allein in Auschwitz, in der Zurückkommen auf Amerika, in der Tobel gestellt, eine kleine Kehle. Wenn ist weg, hat gar keine Ahnung, über Kinder einiglich. Kinder mit einiglich. Nee, ich will euch etwas fragen an Schale. Jemand hat noch gerne schwache Verdiener. Jemand hat noch gar 4 ungezitterte Kinder. Ich will euch fragen an Schale. Ich will euch fragen etwas. Wie viele Kinder hat er zugearbeitet? Millionen! Millionen! Einer hat er mal gesucht, Fahrtisch, aber bei den Kindern hat er gesucht. Er wird ausgerechnet, aber man arget ist 6 Millionen Jiden, wo dann gewähnt, ich weiß, 40 Millionen Jiden auf der Welt. Ganz andere gerecht, das interessiert mich nicht. Er hat sich so gut gearbeitet, so viele Kinder. Der Boy sei, wegzehn Kauf, stellt zehn Zieh, zu der richtige Sache, was man darf. Der dort lädt nicht auf kein andere Machle, nur auf Nuchläufen Kinder mit Hamazan Kinder. Ins laden wir nicht auf Zioines, ins laden wir nicht auf die, alle Sachen. Nur auf dem laden wir ihn. Und das müssen wir aufstellen. Und man stellt das auf zu bisschen. Meint sich jedes Mal, ich die appellieren, man muss es aufstellen, was sofort nicht geht. Sofort besser wie geht. Ich kenne nicht genick, ili fini mule shiru kayom, ili shenaynirin kamoin galov. Und so warte, bis es steht. Billig so ein Unima speak im Lohoi des Lechu Hashem, ele keine als noch im Mann dort, bei Jumai. Seht man, als Amin, change le Teuwe. Ist es noch kein Water auch. Man halt den einen aufpicken, ins picken wir auf Water, ins Wellmer aufpicken, bis er lang jetzt es sich halten, der Hände bach. Es, Raboi sei, jeder soll sich zustellen in seiner Community. Ich verstehe, dass der Chmunis so Burgmott geleben wird, weil du wirst, er soll kennen, gehen mit dem Pipi Karim in der Gas, jeder soll es sehen. Aber after all, in seiner Community, man darf sich doch rechnen mit alle anderen Menschen, was will wollen Kinder. Und einer hat mir gesagt, die meiste Burgmott hat noch gechappet jünglich. Ich weiß, er gechappet meidlich, er hat eine Travel Agency gechappet meidlich. Er hat alles getan. Er hat versiegt, von der Acharein, von der Tachtoinen, von der Elioinen. Wenn wir gehen Elioinen zu, sie wird Tachtoinen Molsi. Ist er nicht nur er ist allein gewesen. Ich will bei Nachem gewesen. Nachem hat es gechappet in einem heiligen Rebenstechter, in Satmer Rebenskinder. Weiß Nachem, ich will dir sagen, komm auf der Chmunis, bist in Jail. Ich arbeite auf einem Platz, ich mache da Mikve im Beis begann. Ich tue da Platz, ich mache eine Mikve. Ist du als eine School, wo die School hat aufgestellt mit Dienes Yisroel, für die kranke Kinder, sie tue alle meine kranke Kinder, sie tue Alzheimer's, sie tue, wie heißen sie, die Mangaloids, alle meine kranke Kinder, man geht daran in Bos, man fuhrt daheim, geht man daran in Bos, wo die trug dich herum, bis der Rakevet Chusen, Rakevet Kala. Weiß ich, wie kranke Meidlich sie tue. A Meidlich können sich viele Ziehsätze, sie tue, ich nehme, ich gehe nicht, wir sagen, gehen nach Heim. Können sich Ziehsätze auf dem Boss leben dir, und als du willst, können sie dir geben, ein Glätt auch, und sie weiß doch nicht, was sie mit dir. Nachher mir, die Beheime, die es gehabt, als ein Großmeidl, als ein Kliege, elegante, up-to-date Girl, bis mir schicken, und du kommst her, was du geht jeden Tag, wenn du fuhrst daheim, wenn du kommst zu der Arbeit, was du gekannt eine, was du gekannt 50, a vielen Boss. Jetzt die geht in eine Nahrigkeit nachher mir. Hey, did you make a lifetime mistake? Anyway, ich viel bad, Vater, weil jetzt können wir schon gut nicht stehen. Schön, will ich jetzt, dass der Eulim soll aushören,
muss die Frauen haben zu verkaufen.
Und wenn ich gleich auf, sucht mir jeder, wie geht's ist. Und ich will nicht suchen, schon bekommen 3 Telefoncalls, wenn ich noch inmitten der Nacht. Bei mir ist schon lang, halt doch schon noch ein Davenen. Du darfst mich mit dem Netz. Der Netz ist 7, bei mir ist schon 8, halb 9. Und man kalt daran, noch you touched me. Unbelievable. Ich will auch wieder nach Schitten von dem. Nicht mit mir. Stellt auf eigens, du auch. Noch eine fremde Frau, muss kommen und suchen Lectures.
Jetzt, in der Maße, sei gerät in Connecticut, bei der Convention. Es geht darin mit der alle Schieren Organisations, haben wir es darauf gelegt. Aber in Wilhelmsburg hat man es auch noch nicht daran gelassen. Ihr versteht? Das ist unsere Beheimlichkeit. Jetzt bleiben wir interstellig für alle wichtigen Sachen. Jetzt gehen wir auch in die Lectures. Ich gehe das Sachen mit Rusches von Basianke Meidlich, ich gehe Rusches von Satmer Meidlich. Sie da solche Meetings. Die Satmer Meidlich sind gut nicht interstellig. Sie kennen die Sprache, sie haben den Accent, den beautiful American accent, and they know just
to use the right vocabulary in the right time, as it's so special that you don't even know how special you are. Is bei Meile, stellt zusammen, eine heimische Sache. Noch so ein Schumziti mit Karebes in Abunem, ihm befragt nicht mit Sackmer, Kackmer, sei sie denn der Eierewraaf, für Moshe Rabbeinu sind gehen Babys, gegen was Eierewraaf, die Sackmer, Kackmer sind. Die größte Eierewraaf, wo sie do, sie los nicht die Jüdischkeit, sie will nicht bringen jeden Trop Jüdischkeit. In alles Tier soll Garmai, sie machen Geld und zerraten auf jenen. Die ganze Shit ist angemacht, zerraten auf jenen. Jetzt hört so, sei erscheint, der Drusche, and you don't even have to bother calling me. Ich weiß, was sie geht. Schkoich. Nimmst noch ein Napkin oder ein Tissue before you start to listen. It's gonna touch you.
My name is Debbie Fox. This is Zahava Farbman. I'm going to have Zahava introduce herself. I am the director and founder of an organization called Magen Yeladim, and our mission is really to bring child safety and child safety programs really focused on abuse prevention throughout the United States, Canada, Mexico. We've been to some other countries as well, but we really bring programs within a community to focus on abuse prevention. That's really what I do. And the topic here is really related to dealing with abuse, prevention, and reaction. And I'm going to try in a very short period of time to give you the ability in a certain way to become part of the team, to become an advocate, to give you enough information that you actually can have a greater awareness so that in every community we have more and more people that are advocates, that are aware and able to advocate for safety of children. What does it take? In order to create safety for any child, it really takes a whole community. To create a safe environment for a child, the community has to work together. The problem is that when a community doesn't work together, we actually have a community that allows abuse because there's no awareness and people don't know the symptoms and people don't know how to focus on prevention. And so that community actually provides safety for predators or for offenders. The goal is to have as many people as possible who are aware and who are advocates and who can look at the concept of working together. Because the more we work together, the more we are a community that creates a safe environment for children. And really, everybody plays a role. The question that people always ask is, could abuse really happen in our community? We live in such a safe world. We live in a world that's so culturally rich. And the question people ask is, can it really happen in our community? And what I often ask people to do is just to stop for a minute, to stop on your own, and for everybody just to think about on your own. Do you have a friend that's ever told you, or somebody you know, that anybody has been inappropriate with them? Or do you have a relative who's ever told you, or that you know about, that anybody's been inappropriate with? Or do you have your own story? I go across the country and speak, and I would say that in most situations, just about everybody would raise their hand. And what I think we all need to know is that's too many people. That's too many people who have been impacted by molestation and inappropriate touch. And what we need to all be looking at is that as a community, together, we can all make a difference. And that's what we want to do, is raise all of your awareness so that you can be part of that team, part of that community that really makes a difference. And this is what a community looks like when everybody works together. When we have Rabbanim and their Rebbitzins. Last night, Zahava and I did a training with Rebbitzins, which was really quite powerful. School administration, Rebbeim and Mechanchim and Mechanchos, and an entire staff of the school, parents and children. When everybody is educated, when everybody is aware, that's really what creates a safe community. So educating all of you actually is an active part of awareness and education within a community. So I'm going to really try to talk very quick today. And what I'm going to bring up really in terms of your understanding of issues related to abuse are understanding who might abuse children. I'm going to talk a little bit about safety and supervision at home. And I'm going to talk about recognizing warning signs and dealing with a disclosure. Like I said, I'm going to try to talk very quickly because there is a lot of information. And I really believe that the more people who know, the more advocates we have and the more protected our children are. And that really is that which is most important to all of us, is that our children are protected. So let's start with talking about who might abuse children. This statistic is actually probably the most shocking to us within the frum world, which is that over 90% of offenders are known, loved, and respected by the child. So that fantasy that we all have, that someone comes in out of the dark wearing a hat and a raincoat and slinking into our community and pulling one of our kids out into a forest and dropping them back, isn't actually accurate. It's not the stranger. It's really people in our own world. And within the frum world, this statistic is probably higher because our children don't have access to other people. So we need to be aware of people within our world in order to help fight abuse and to be advocates. So who is it then? If I'm saying that there's 90% that are known, loved, and respected by a child, so who are they? So 68% of molestation occurs at the hands of a family member, which can be parents or step-parents, grandparents, aunts or uncles, brothers, sisters, cousins. And I often say that it sounds like I'm giving you a list of family members, but this is a very painful list for me to say, because in my years of doing this, I've been involved with cases with every single one of these, where there are grandparents. Just this past week, a woman came over to me after a workshop I gave in Lakewood, New Jersey, and said, "It's so interesting that you're speaking tonight. Last night was my grandfather's yahrzeit. I was the only family member who did not go to the yahrzeit dinner. And she couldn't go because of what he did to her." So in every one of these areas, these situations really do occur. They really can occur. It can be family, friends, or neighbors. It can be anybody that has access to a child who's in that child's world. The fastest growing rate of molestation, which is an extremely concerning statistic, is actually child to child. Molestation, about up to 1/3 of molestation occurs at the hands of other children. And among the frum community, among mental health professionals in the frum community, of the greatest concern is brothers and sisters. And I will say that I personally have taken the program that I run to so many Gedolim across the United States and Canada, and every single one, when I finish, says the same thing. Every one. I want more about brothers and sisters. Talk more about brothers and sisters. So we try to be very practical in bringing up that touching relates to brothers and sisters as well when we teach children and we teach family members. And that's why actually I'm going to talk about that some here today as well. So it's very, very important, and we're going to talk about this, is that children be supervised, because children, they say 4 to 5 years older and younger children, that is the statistics that's growing 5 times higher than adult to child molestation. So it's really important that we're aware of. And in today's world, it's not necessarily 5 years. It can be 2 years difference. It can even be same age, but there's a power differential where one child may threaten another. And so we have to really be aware of our children and who our children are with and make sure that they're supervised. Let's talk a little bit about the characteristics of an offender. There really isn't a scientifically valid profile of a child molester. It sure would make things easier for all of us if there was, but there isn't. But what we can do is look at characteristics. And so I'm going to just go through some of those characteristics because they're things you can look for. One thing, like I said before, adults who look like you and I, they're not people who are hanging around in a dirty raincoat. They really look like you and I. That's what they look like. It's adults who have a level of friendliness with children that makes you a little bit uncomfortable. Adults who are in places that you wouldn't expect them. A family member who spends a lot of time hanging in your children's rooms, if it's in your home, or if it's in a shul, they're that adult who's taking children into classrooms. Or away or hanging a lot with children. I often say that in every community I go to, someone stops me and says, there's this one man in our shul. That one man is in every shul. And if you are all aware, you can actually create gedarim around that, right? It's important to be aware. Don't just suspect it, stop it. Adults who get their social needs through children. I always say if I go to a kiddush, I can say hello to everybody's kids, but I want to spend my time with people my age. But someone who's spending all their time with small children, that's something you want to be aware of. Even relatives in your home, you want to make sure they're getting their social needs. They can be very nice to kids, but their social needs are being met through the adults. They spend an excessive amount of time emailing, texting, calling children. Buying a lot of gifts for children, trying to create special relationships with children. These are things you want to be aware of. You want to ask questions about. Those are things you want to know. And people often ask, how does it actually happen that children can be inappropriately touched? In our world, we know what we can and can't do. How can it happen? And the process is one that it's important for adults to know. It's a process called grooming. And what grooming does is it gently, in a very subtle way, lulls boundaries so that the child doesn't quite get what's happening, but neither do the adults in their life because it's such a gradual process. I'm going to go through this really, really quickly, what happens is that in general, grooming is done by adults, so it can be done by older children as well. And what they do is they target a child in a vulnerable situation. Now, we can all say that our children aren't vulnerable because we have a very intact house. We're fine. But anything can make a child vulnerable. You can have your sixth child and mom is overwhelmed and one kid needs more attention. There can be financial issues. There can be marital issues. A parent can be caring for an aging parent. There can be a sick child in the house or a child with special needs. Any of those can create a kind of neediness for more attention in a child and a vulnerability. So that good groomer knows how to target that child, and they gain the trust of that child. They start developing a special relationship with that child. You said you had a spelling test, didn't you? Let me see if I can help you study for that. And then they call, how'd you do on that? I'm the one who cares. It's you and me. You did so well, let me take you out for some ice cream. It's developing a very special relationship that's saying you and me were special. Others don't really care quite as much as I do or know you quite as much as I do. And they start to fill a need in that child's life that remember the child is vulnerable. They fill a need. And when that need is filled by this one person, it fills the mind of that child. All other kids in fourth grade are playing with other fourth graders. Their world is other fourth graders. This child's world is involved in an adult, and it isolates them from other children. And when they're isolated from other children, that gives the person the ability to go in and be more physical. But when they start becoming more physical, it's very gradual. It's looking at their cheeks and saying things like, you're cold, come here, let me warm you up. Do you have a fever? Are you feeling okay? You did so well on that test. Come over here. I'm going to give you a big hug. And it's very gradual. Lots of touch, very gradually, until it becomes inappropriate. And at that point, how's a child to say no? They can't say no at that point when it's become such a special relationship. And that's when real secrecy and control takes over. And so that's why it is so important for parents and for adults to be supervising. It's so important for parents and adults to be aware of all adult-child relationships, to be involved, not to have your child have relationships with other adults that a parent is not involved in. Parents have to ask questions of kids about where they are and who they're with and what they're doing so that the child knows the parent is involved in it. And parents have to have discussions with children where they're letting children know that, we're never allowed to have people look and talk and look at and talk about and touch the private areas of your body. And if anybody ever did, I want you to come and talk to me because it matters to me and I care. So that if anything ever happened, the parent has to be the one to open that discussion. We can't depend on our children to open it if we haven't shown that we're open. We're the parents. We have to open the discussion. So if we open the discussion and children know to come and talk to us, and we're checking on those relationships and observing those relationships, that's parent prevention. I want to talk for just a second about safety in shuls, which is that our children go to shul. You have to realize that if your child's not davening by your side, in most shuls, they're not supervised unless they are in a group room and where children have supervised groups. And it's really important to be aware they are not supervised because there's a lot that has happened in shuls, in shul bathrooms, in rooms that are open. It's really important as parents that you make sure that you're telling your children where it's okay for them to be, that they can never go into private areas, that they always have to remain either in the shul or in a public area, and that you are checking on them. So you have to be very active in terms of the supervision of your own children in places like a shul. Let's talk for a minute about how would you know if a child had been inappropriately touched? How would you know that? How would an adult know that, right? It is extremely rare for a child to come forward and say, just by the way, somebody touched me. It is extremely rare that happened. Remember what we said, in general, there are secrets that are involved in this, where an abuser will say, this is a secret between us. And in fact, unfortunately, many of the abusers will actually threaten children. So if you tell, I will kill a family member, or I will hurt you. And generally, it's, I will harm a family member. So these children are afraid to tell. Or they may say something like, you can go ahead and tell, that's okay. I'm just going to have to tell them that you initiated it, and I was just trying to make you happy, and I know your parents will be really ashamed of you. So, but I'll do it if you. Go ahead. You can tell if you want. So that means that a child's living with a secret, a really big secret that's overtaking their life, right? So how would parents know? How would mechanchim or mechanchos know? How would anybody know that maybe a child has been inappropriately touched? Because we have to be the one to know. The likelihood of their telling us is very low. So I'd say most significantly, what you need to look at is significant unexplained changes, either at home or in school. Which would mean a child who was really doing, I've heard this over the last 3 weeks. I've been in Baltimore and Lakewood and different places and giving a lot of workshops, and this story has come up, I'd say 7 or 8 times. Same thing. My child came home from camp this summer. He, all of a sudden, rather than coming in and being excited, my child was very quiet, very sad, didn't want to really go to school, goes to school, isn't all of a sudden used to be a very good student, used to be very social. Their lives have changed. They're totally different. They are totally different. They never want to go back to that camp. They don't talk about camp at all. They never want to go back. That's a significant change. A parent shouldn't ignore that. A parent has to figure out what happened. Why is a child saying things like that? So you want to look for any significant changes in your child. And you may start seeing signs of depression, any fears, any sleep difficulties, any avoiding specific people or situations or activities. They might be extreme modesty, covered up in layers and layers. These girls who are wearing sweatshirts that cover them and they look like a size 12 on the outside and they're a size 4 on the inside, where their body is saying, don't look at me, just don't look at me, I'm totally covered. And they may become very seductive in dress because somebody's stimulated something in them. They may develop eating disorders, both girls and boys. They may start bedwetting. So when you see any of these, you have to make sure that you're starting to talk to children, starting to assess, starting to figure out what's gone on. Why don't kids disclose? Wouldn't it be so much easier for us if they just came to us and told us right away? But why don't they? And it's important for us to know why they don't. One reason is that they really may not have the language or the vocabulary because we never spoke to them about their body. So they don't know how. They don't know how to come to us. They are very embarrassed. It is embarrassing. They've been told it was a secret. They've been threatened. Thank you. They've been threatened. They may still love the abuser, and they don't want to create any trouble. They may have experienced pleasure, and that's very shameful to them. They all feel ashamed. They all feel it was their fault. They all feel they had a role in it. And for many children and for many families, they fear that the community will ostracize them if they come forward. And I think it's very important to be aware that if somebody has been victimized, that we stand up for the victim and that we not ostracize the victim and their family, because so often what victims will say is, I can heal from the abuse, but I can't heal from the betrayal of my community. And we have to all pay attention to that. But the number one thing the number one reason that a child doesn't disclose is because they don't think anybody will believe them. Remember that their offender told them nobody would believe them. So the number one thing you need to do is believe them. So let's just talk about how to handle a disclosure, and we're going to end. The most important thing to do if a child discloses to you is a little bit counterintuitive, which is to, rather than to reacting, what? Who did what? What did he do? You've got to be kidding. Nobody would do such a thing, right? Rather than that reaction, you need to remain really calm. Because part of what happens in a child's mind is that they fear you can't handle it. It's so big in their head. They feel you, the adult, can't handle it either. So you need to stay calm. You keep your emotions in check. Don't act shocked. Just repeat back whatever they say to you. Don't ask more questions. Don't try in a disclosure to get the whole story. You don't need the whole story. There's time. So just listen. Just be there. Just repeat what they say. If they say, he pulled my pants down, don't ask more questions about how and where and what. Just say, repeat the same words. He pulled your pants down. That's it. That's all you want to say. Reassure them of two really important things. Say, thank you for trusting me. You did the right thing. Because they think they did the wrong thing by trusting you. And the other thing that you need to say is, I'm so sorry this happened to you. Because they need to know that you believe something wrong happened to them. They weren't at fault. Something wrong happened to them. And the last piece of this is for us all to understand it is never a child's fault when a child is abused. It is always the adult's fault. And we have to keep that in mind. So it's a very calm discussion. And I actually am going to end with a poem. And I'm going to end with this poem because I had a client in my private practice, and she was abused by a guest who had come to her house every year for 18 years, and during a few of those years, he was very inappropriate with her, and nobody would have known. It was in her own house, and the family knew the person, and nobody would have known. She was from a very chashuv family, and she went to seminary in Eretz Yisrael, and she came back, and she was ready for shidduchim, and she was having a very hard time within herself, because as frum as she couldn't daven at all. And so it hurt her so terribly, but she kept saying the same thing, which was, how can I speak to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that I would believe in would never have allowed all that to happen to me? I have nothing to say. I don't have anything to say. I can't talk. I have no conversation. And you can imagine the shame of a good frum girl who could not daven. And at one point I said to her, don't try to pick up a sitter. Just when you're ready, let HaKadosh Baruch Hu know what you want him to know about your experience. Talk to him. You talk to him your way. And she wrote this poem, which she knows that I have used many times. And I read it because I want people to walk out with a passion for preventing this from ever happening to one of your children, to one of the people in your community, to one of your students, and to honor those who have had the experience. And with this, I'm going to end and give you some support with and some more spiritual way of viewing all of this with Zahava. So I'm just going to end with this. I feel robbed of a body all of my own, robbed of the innocence children should have, robbed of my sanity and peace of mind, robbed of my ability to be happy and grow. All of this was just taken from me. I had no control, and the robbers left me filled with a big, very needy burden. Bad secrets and feelings, overwhelming ones, to carry inside of me for a long time, not knowing how to deal with them. I feel used, taken and used. They found someone they could use and abuse, and I let. I didn't really know that I had the choice. I didn't know how to use my free will. They used my body as if I was a toy with the purpose of playing with it until it is broken and ready for the garbage. They took advantage of my inability to fight back, of my cooperation and my tolerance. They used me for the good feelings I gave them. They used me to fulfill their needs, as if I was a rag to use and dirty, as I was snow, pure and soft, and now I'm still snow, only black and icy, dirtied and kicked around by the footsteps of the scary people on top of me. So I leave you with the charge of being aware, of being an advocate, and of creating a world that's safe for all of our children.
Thank you, Debbie, for that very important presentation. My name is Zahava Farbman. I've been a social worker for about 21 years. I'm now going for my doctorate with a focus in grief and trauma. I am the Associate Director of High Lifeline's Crisis Intervention, Trauma, and Bereavement Department, and I am the mental health responder for Hatzalah in the 5 towns in Far Rockaway, which is really just a very long way of saying that HaKadosh Baruch Hu has put me in a position in my life where I am involved with, entrenched with all different types of crises, traumas, and tragedies on a daily basis. I really look at it as Avodas HaKodesh and not a job. And outside of my family, it is my greatest passion. But my most important role, of course, Baruch Hashem, is that of a mother. And I look around the room and I see not only Rebbitzins and community leaders, but mothers and grandmothers. So I want to start with a story that I heard from a man named Michael Levy in my shul, Eish Kodesh in Woodmere. Michael is blind. He's been blind from birth, and he's married to Chavi, who is a paraplegic. And they have, Baruch Hashem, 2 wonderful, healthy children, the second of whom is getting married in a few weeks. So Michael told this story from the pulpit. He said that when he was a little boy, his mother used to walk him to school because he was blind. But all of his friends walked to school on their own. So one day he said to his mother, I want the opportunity. I want to walk to school by myself. His mother said, okay, we're going to practice. So they walked out of the house. They took 16 steps. They made a right. They took 32 steps, made a left, etc., until they got to school. And they practiced this way for a couple weeks until one day Michael said, okay, I'm ready. I'm going to do it. And he left the house, he took 16 steps, made a right, took 32 steps, etc., until he came to school. And the security guard said, "Good morning, Michael." And then the security guard said, "Good morning, Mrs. Levy." And Michael heard the swish of his mother's bike as she raced away. But Michael said, "From that time until the day my mother died, I knew my mother was with me, no matter what I was going through. No matter if she was with me physically or not, she was always with me." So how can we, as mothers, as grandmothers, as rebbitzins, as teachers, as community leaders, how can we make our children feel that we are with them no matter what it is that they're going through? No matter if it's abuse, if it's an illness, if it's a death in the family, God forbid, from an illness or from something sudden like a car accident or a fire or a natural disaster or homicides or suicides. And I go locally, nationally, internationally, and I see really the worst of the worst. How can we make our children feel that we are with them, whether or not we're with them or not? So the first and most important thing that I feel you need to know for your children, and again, whether it's in your family or in your community, is to validate and support them no matter what it is that they're going through. No matter how they're feeling, thinking, coping, or reacting to whatever situation it is that they've gone through, we are with them, we are supporting them, we are validating them. Which means, like Debbie just said, if a child comes to you and reveals a molestation, and they're crying, or they're angry, or they're confused, it's not to say, "No, don't cry. No, don't be angry. You don't need to be angry." Right? That would be totally counterintuitive. It's validating, even if we feel their reaction is wrong, because there is no right or wrong in the way anybody, a child or adult, feels, thinks, copes, reacts to any given situation. Viktor Frankl was a famous psychiatrist. He himself lived through Auschwitz, and he coined the phrase, "An abnormal reaction to an abnormal situation is totally normal." When I speak in schools, which I do a lot, I say to kids, you're sitting in a classroom. If you say 2 + 2 is 5, your teacher is going to say, "No, that's the wrong answer." But when it comes to the way we're feeling about anything, any situation, there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. Okay? So whether it's last night, like Debbie said, when we spoke to the Rebbitzins, I went through some typical feelings that people may feel, and I showed places in the Torah, because it's really a passion of mine. The Torah is really the first psychology book. It's not just it's not just a history book, it's not just a rule book with the do's and don'ts, but everything that we go through, every experience, every feeling and emotion that we go through is there in the Torah. So today I want to choose a few different feelings that we went through last night that focus more on children, okay? Like fear. After a child is abused, right? Or a child is facing an illness or a death in the family. Fear is a very, very normal and appropriate reaction for adults, right? How many of the tragedies, Rahman al-Atzan, that we are facing in our community, it's scary. Who's not scared? You know, when we hear some of the situations that we're going through. Kal v'chomer for children. A father dies suddenly in a car accident. A child is scared. Is that going to happen to my father? Is that going to happen to me the next time I go into a car? So I feel like a mother's maternal gut reaction, Shefla, don't be scared. Don't be scared. Don't worry. Don't be scared. But no, hefach. Fear is okay. A certain amount of fear in our lives is normal, is healthy. You know what? If we didn't have fear in our lives, we wouldn't look both ways when we cross the street. And that would be disastrous, right? Every morning we say in Az Yashir, we talk about the Yidden who watched the Egyptians drown in the river, and they stood there and they were scared. In fact, it says about the Jews who watched it up close, who witnessed it, that they trembled in fear. And it says about the Jews that were standing in the background, that heard about it by the text maybe or emails, that they were nervous, that they were scared. Very validating that fear is a very normal reaction. But what do we do with the fear? How do we help our children deal with the fear? Something that I think a lot about and I talk a lot about is balance. balance is very important, right? The Shvil HaZahav, Rambam's Shvil HaZahav. The Kotzker Rebbe had in one pocket a little note that said, "We're nothing but the dust of the earth." And in the other pocket, he had a note that said, "The world was created for me." How do we do that? Balance. Right? The Nazir was somebody who wanted, a life of tremendous kedusha. So what did he do? He separated from the community. He grew his hair. He didn't drink wine. That's very nice and that's very holy and that's very commendable. But he had to bring a korban chatas. Why? Because Hashem doesn't want us to live a life of extreme. He wants us to live in the community in a tsanua, an appropriate way. He wants us to drink wine in an appropriate way. Balance. We have to have fear and acknowledge the fear, but we have to balance it with emunah and with simcha. And we have to take the fear and channel it and use it. One of my kids, Baruch Hashem, Chazei Hashem, I have kids of all ages and stages. So one of my kids a few years ago, I think he was around 8 at the time, he experienced something scary. So I taught him, I said, I learned from one of my high school teachers that it's a skula to say the Perek of Yor Tehillim at night. Right? So he was 9, so I taught him to say Perek Yud every night. And you know what? It helped. After a few days, he felt like he was doing something with his fear to channel it. Kiss the mezuzah every day when we leave the house. Hashem, please protect our day. Okay? Guilt is a reaction that is not just for the Jewish mothers, right? Guilt is something that every person finds something to feel guilty about in every situation, including children. Including children. I've been in schools where a teacher died suddenly, or a principal, and kids will say, "Oh my gosh, I was chutzpahdik, and that's why this happened," or a sibling or a classmate, God forbid, something happened to, you know what, I wasn't nice to him 3.5 weeks ago when we all went for pizza and I didn't invite him, and maybe, or maybe I didn't behave, and that's why mommy got sick. Guilt is a very normal reaction, and we have to validate it. We have to go through the guilt, but to explain to children that guilt, first of all, we make decisions based on what we know at that moment and the circumstances of our life at that moment, right? Kids very often will feel guilty about a decision that they made, and they feel that that's a cause. And to explain also that guilt comes from one of 3 places in my experience and my understanding. Number 1, guilt is a psychological defense mechanism where we need to be angry at somebody and blame somebody. Who is the easiest person to be angry and blame? Ourselves. Number 2, guilt comes from a hashkafic perspective, where we know, although it's confusing, although it's difficult to understand, that everything comes from Hashem, and this is exactly the way Hashem wanted it. I'm going to segue to that for 1 second. Hashkafically, you have such an important position to give your children not only unconditional love from you, from the mother, from the grandmother, from the Rebbetzin, from whoever you are, but Hashem loves you. No matter what it is, Hashem loves you, and Hashem would never do anything to hurt you. And we don't understand, right? Sometimes Hashem does things that we don't understand or that even upset us. Just like mommy, I'm going to tell you that you can't have ice cream before dinner. And you might run up to your room and slam the door and throw a tantrum. But at the end of the day, you'll say, you know what? Mommy loves me. And for some reason, she doesn't want me to have this ice cream before dinner. HaKadosh Baruch Hu loves you, Sheifala. And yes, it's hard to understand why this is happening. Even Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Who was greater than Moshe? Moshe said to Hashem, show me your ways. I want to understand why you do the things you do. Show me your face. And what did Hashem say? No, I'm sorry. You and no other human being can understand why I do the things I do. I'm going to show you my face. Teach your children that the most important tefillah, like Debbie said, a kid who goes through something, it's hard to open up the book and daven. Maybe at another Aguda conference, I'll come back. I have a presentation on Rav Pinkus's Sha'arm B'Tefillah. Sometimes it's hard to open up the siddur and daven, and there are at least 10 different ways to daven. And crying and screaming is a mode of tefillah. But to teach your children that sometimes the greatest tefillah is to say, Hashem, I know this is from you, and therefore it's good, but I don't understand it, and it's even upsetting me. So please, Hashem, just give me the strength to get through this. What a powerful tefillah. And it could be said in English 100 times a day. Getting back to guilt, psychological defense mechanism, hashkafic perspective. We know this is all from you, Hashem, but really maybe there was something I could have, I would have, I should have. So it's like the Yetzer Hara. And number 3, guilt comes from a place of love. I love my mommy, and it's so hard to see her in pain, or it's so hard to be without her. I would have done anything to help her. sadness, confusion, anger, feeling guilty, right? Even anger. We have to give permission for our children to feel, to think, to cope, to react. And sometimes as the people closest to these children, whether it's the mother, the grandmother, the rebbitzin, for us to give them permission, a safe place, a comfortable place to deal with it however they need to deal with it. If you're a mother and your family is going through a situation, know that each of your siblings, each of your children may be going through it in a different way. They're all related by blood. They may even look the same, but on the inside, you know as mothers that each of your children has different personalities, different emotional makeups, different resiliency levels, different coping mechanisms, and they're each going to go through it in their own way. Very often I'll say to families, in the very beginning, before a levaya, or right after, any type of crisis that they're going through. And again, a crisis could be a divorce, it could be a financial difficulty, it could be, a behavior, a child acting out. It doesn't have to be, the big, we call it trauma with a big T and trauma with a little t. So very often I will say to a family right after they've experienced any type of difficult situation, I'll say, when Hashem took Bnei Yisrael through Kriyas Yamsuf, when he split the sea for them, how did he split it? Did he split it in two, like the picture books of our youth, like the Haggadahs we used to look at as children? No, he actually split it in 12. Picture like a swimming pool, 12 lanes. Why? Because Bnei Yisrael was going to get to the other side together, as one nation, as one family. But each shevet, each brother had to go through it in their own way, in whatever way worked best for them. And those lanes, again, picture like a swimming pool with 12 lanes, they were see-through. Why? Because the Midrashim say that they were see-through. Why? Because each brother had to go through it in their own way, but they were checking up on each other while they were each experiencing it in their own way. It's so validating. It's so empowering. It sets the stage for a family to hear this in the very beginning. I've had families come back to me months later and say, Zahava, you set the stage. You gave us permission to each experience it in our own way, while not comparing us one to the other. Because if one kid just needs to cry, and the other kid just wants to tell stories about the niftar, and the other kid wants to just throw himself back into learning in yeshiva, it doesn't mean that one loves the niftar more than the other. It means that everyone's experiencing it in different ways. And the way that our children cope and react, what do I mean by that? This situation has caused all different types of feelings inside, right? And we need to get them out. Because if they sit inside, they grow and grow and grow, and like a volcano, one day it's going to burst. We need to support our children going through the pain, not around it, not on top of it, not underneath it, because if we don't go through the pain now, it's going to come back later to bite us. But to help our children get those feelings out, I say sometimes to kids, imagine you have like a cold inside and you cough a little bit, you get it out, makes you feel much better. As parents, as people closest to these kids, we need to look at each child and know what's going to work for this kid. This kid is not a talker on a good day, right? I have some of those kids, how was your day? Good. Anything else to tell me? No, it was fine. Okay, so some kids are just not talkers. Some of us adults are not talkers, right? Are not criers. So we have to help them find alternate modes of expression, whether it's through writing or drawing or, other modes of creativity. Doing a project, very often I'll suggest to families do a project together. Each kid will take a different part of the project according to their, developmental stage, according to their strengths and their hobbies. I had a mother call me following a tragedy, and she said, I need a therapist for my son. He's not talking since the tragedy. He's just locked in his room in the basement, banging out on his guitar. I said, okay, can you tell me a little bit about your son prior to the tragedy? What did he do when he would feel sad or angry or frustrated? So she said, well, yeah, he would go down to the basement, lock the door, and just bang out on his guitar. I said, great, then he's doing exactly what he should be doing. And parents need to know that it's not just talking or crying that are appropriate modes of expression. There are lots of other different ways of expression. Being action-oriented, especially our older kids, helping them channel their passions, their emotions, their feelings into a positive action is very therapeutic. I want to spend a few minutes really al regal achas, because each part of what I've said is, an hour presentation on its own. But just very quickly, I want to go through the developmental stages and just talk a little bit how the different ages react to trauma and tragedy. Okay? First of all, kids younger than 3. Very often I'll talk to parents and I'll say, I have a 2-year-old, but yeah, we don't need to talk about her because she's oblivious. No. All children, pick up feelings in the house. All children pick up body language, pick up feelings, right? I mean, I'm not talking about newborns, though there are plenty of studies, right, that even newborns and even children in utero, will pick up emotions and feelings. I'm talking about, an 18-month-old, a 2-year-old who doesn't have the ability to say what is going on, but realizes that mommy is very distracted and mommy is very sad and there's like a tense environment in the house, okay? Preschool age children from 3 really till 5, but very often I'll include first graders, the beginning of 2nd grade in this category. They do not understand the severity of a serious diagnosis. They don't understand the finality of death. Okay, so with preschool age kids, it's very important to say the words that are most difficult to say, especially when it comes to a death. We need to say, we're not going to see her again. It starts to wrap their heads around, the finality. But preschool age kids don't have the emotional maturity. They don't have the developmental ability to come and say to you, I'm really stressed about what you just said to me. Can we talk about it? It's going to come out in play. Really watch them play. Watch, their drawings. I once had a kid in a family I was working with. She took a box and marbles and a doll, and she buried the baby. Okay, this is what she was picking up. Preschool age kids will come back for a long time with questions. It's not because they don't understand or they're being annoying. It's just it takes them longer to wrap their little brains around what you just said. I once had the unfortunate experience of telling a 3-year-old class that one of their classmates died in January, and the teacher told me until the end of the year they would come back and ask, where's Yossi? When is he coming back? Where'd he go? Preschool age kids are very matter of fact. They'll come into school, my mommy died. My mommy's in Shemayim. That's the way they talk to each other. And parents, teachers, they want to stop it. They want to intervene. No, let them talk. That's the way they talk. Very, very matter of fact stage. School age kids are very, very focused on the details, the who, the what, the where, the when. Right? If there's a fire, how did it start? How did the people get out? What did the bodies look like? If there was a car accident, how did it happen? The psychology behind it is if they can wrap their little brains around it, if they can understand it, then it's not going to happen to them. So to the best of your ability, according to, developmental age appropriateness, give them answers. And that's really for all ages. Honesty is always the best policy. When we don't tell kids what's going on, so many families think, I'm going to protect my child. I'm not going to tell them that mommy was just diagnosed with cancer. I'm not going to tell them the truth about how daddy died. It leaves them open-ended. They're more scared when they don't understand. When we name the monster, when we give shape to the monster, it makes the monster less scary. Okay, so honesty, open communication is always the best policy. When it comes to teenagers, of course, teenagers are much more focused on hashkafic and philosophical questions. And if we are not comfortable to answer them, sometimes the best gift we can give our teenagers is somebody else to speak to. Okay, and teenagers, especially if you can give them something to do to focus their emotions, their feelings, it's very helpful. And teenagers are also, God bless them, very narcissistic, in a good way. But this was my friend. This was my teacher. This was my neighbor. This is the person I sat across from math once with, but they very much connect it to their own lives. A general, very important rule for kids of all ages, if there's something out there that your kids are going to hear on the street, on the playground, through text, through emails, it's very important that they hear it from you, from a trusted adult in a safe, secure fashion, from a place of Kedusha, really. And even that's from the Torah. When Yisro was helping Moshe set up the court system, right? So the pasuk says that Moshe called him into his tent to tell him what was happening. But if you look on the Pesukim prior, Yisro already knew. Like, what did that mean? So some of the Mepharshim say that Moshe wanted to tell Yisro from a place of Kedusha. Not like what he's hearing out in the Welt, but like from his Lashon, from his way. Okay, I'm going to end with a story. There's so much more, but I hope this gives you, a few tips to take home. And I think it also really gives you the idea that there are people out there, Debbie Fox and myself, that can help you with really any type of situation that you, your family, your community is dealing with. So I'm going to end with the same story I ended with last night, a story that I heard from my Rav, Moshe Weinberger. And he tells a story about two little boys in the old city of Yerushalayim centuries ago. And the two boys had lost their mother a few years prior and were now sitting Shiva for their father. And the Rav of the old city came to be Menachem Aval, and like with any good Rav, he came with his entourage of Hasidim, and he sat down and the boys were quiet, and after a few minutes the Rav started telling stories about the boys' parents. After a little while he said the Hamakom and he left. And the Hasidim turned to him and they said, Rebbe, what about the halacha? You're not allowed to talk before the Avelim speak. How come you started talking? And the Rav said to them, you didn't hear them scream? You didn't look into their eyes and see the screams and hear their screams? I just responded to what I was hearing. I think as mothers, as grandmothers, as educators, as community leaders, as Rebbetzins, and whatever role it is that you're sitting here, that's our most important mandate, to hear our children's screams, whether they're saying it verbally or not, to look into our children's eyes, to know what they need, and to be able to respond to them. Debbie and I have 5 minutes left, and we're both open to answering any questions.
About validating your child, the importance of that. What if, a student or, any child that relates something, whether it's major or minor, and it definitely did not happen, but you don't want to break that trust and that, you don't want to not validate what they're saying, but at the same time, it didn't happen. It related something that happened over the weekend, but the person they were referring to was on the West Coast and they were on the East Coast. But clearly they're crying out. So you want to validate their feelings, but also kind of bring them to reality that it didn't happen. So you want to get to the core of why they're saying what they're saying. How do you do that?
I think you answered your own question. I really think you answered your own question. If a child is making up a story, there's obviously something to it. He's crying out for attention. He's crying out for help. He's possibly alluding to something that's going on, but doesn't want to be exact about it. One of the sessions, I don't know if it was last night or if it's over Shabbos, one of the sessions is like, ask the Rav, my friend asked me to ask, that type of thing. So sometimes, it's that type of situation where they're alluding to something that really happened, but they don't want to say it straight out. Whatever it is, there's something behind that lie, So you want to validate. You definitely want to say like, wow, that sounds like that must have been, a very difficult experience. Can you tell me more about it? And maybe as he's like groping for details, you know what I'm saying? You'll be able to together catch him in his lie and together, talk about it. But definitely the first and most important step always, no matter what it is to validate and offer support, and then, get to the core.
So it is important to help them realize that this thing that you're saying didn't happen.
Right. The answer is yes, exactly, eventually. You keep answering your own questions. Very good. The answer is eventually. Do you know what I'm saying? Whether it's at that moment, it depends. It could have been like a big deal for him to come and make up the story and share this with you, so if it's at that moment, I don't know if you want to just offer your validation and then, the next time you see him say, I was thinking about that story you told me and I was wondering, but you know what I'm saying? And it also depends, I think, what role you are. Are you the mother? Are you the Rebbetzin? Are you a teacher? Do you want to refer to a therapist and like work it that way and just kind of offer unconditional support? Yeah.
Debbie, I wanted to ask you if you could say a little bit more about siblings.
Siblings? Yeah. I'm going to, in terms of prevention, okay, let's talk about that just for a minute. Thank you. We didn't have time, so I didn't go into it, but what I think is awareness is the number one preventer And what I will say is, in general, David Pelkowitz and I were doing a workshop together in Baltimore a few months ago. And I sat down and had a long talk with him, and I asked him, what do you think is the number one tool we have towards preventing abuse? And his answer was exactly the same as mine, which is you. It's you, the parent. You are the number one tool towards preventing abuse, which means that if a parent has a relationship with a child, if a parent opens discussions with children, educates them about what is okay and what isn't okay, if a parent supervises, if a parent has let a child know that if anything happens, I want you to talk to me, those are the keys that prevent anything inappropriate. So let's talk about the home itself, right? So within the home, you do need to have rules within the home about, open doors when everybody's playing. A parent needs to pay attention to any special relationships among siblings. That if a sibling is generally an older brother, is spending a lot of time with a sister and a lot of time behind closed doors. That you have to be supervising that. The most important thing you can do is have general conversations at appropriate windows of opportunity with your children on a fairly regular basis that are very light, that say things like, I just want to remind you that nobody should ever touch, look at, or talk about your body, the private areas of your body, and you're not allowed to touch, look at, or talk about anybody else's, right? And if ever that would happen, I want to make sure that you tell me, because then I can help you, right? So before a child goes to camp, before a child goes to a sleepover, it's important to review those rules. Did you hear how calmly I did that? Almost as calmly as Ahava speaks. Very calmly, not with a lot of hesitation that I can't talk about it, but with such a calm voice that a child knows they can come back and talk to you and that you care. And when you say that, no one's allowed to, you've got to say, that really means nobody. Nobody's allowed to touch you or look at you or talk about the private areas of your body. So what if kids in school were to want to play a touching game? Is that allowed? No. Touching is never a game. That's not allowed. What about if somebody in Shoal wanted to play a touching game or wanted to touch you? Would that be allowed? No, that would never be allowed. What about at home? What if a brother or a sister ever wanted to touch or look at or talk about the private areas of your body? Would that ever be allowed? That's never allowed. So what would you do? You automatically have to tell mommy or tati. Automatically. You'd have to come tell, and then we can try to help out. There's also another piece to this, and this is a very hard piece, and I actually really put responsibility on fathers who aren't in the room, and that is that fathers have to speak to sons, and they need to be having conversations with their sons before going to yeshiva about themselves and touch, about no one touching them, and about them not touching anybody else, right? They have to have conversations with their sons before they go to a mikvah. There are conversations that have to be had. And when those conversations happen, they need to say, if you ever struggle with this yourself, I want you to come talk to me. And I have had more stories than I care to share of fathers who have had that conversation where boys have come forward and said, in the middle of the night, I'm going to get off with this last comment, Tati, I just touched my sister. You told me I could tell you. So these conversations are the greatest tool that you have towards protection. And we are going to introduce Dr. Lieberman. Okay, thank you very much.
Sie gewinnen Zahid, der ist aber aufgelegt, der Stickel, in der Gide sponsert ist. Als einer sucht mir, zugekalt, einer von der Viere von der Gide, und gesagt, was hat jetzt getan mit dem Maschinen und noch? Jetzt hat sie gemacht, gerecht. Jetzt hat sich verloren. Jetzt hat sich geschrien, sie gescheit nicht, man darf gut nicht stehen. Sagen sie, eins haben wir gut nicht getan. Noch hat alles getan. Sie haben nicht geglaubt, dass sie können so unhalten, mit der Samaruche, 10 Jahren und gesucht dasselbe repetitiously noch einmal und noch einmal und noch einmal. Schleumer Melech hat gesucht an nicht Schleumer. Von uns hat ihm noch ein Saal gegleibt, hat Briskeruf gesucht, weil er Tibber gehasert ist Mischigas, 1000 Mal haben sie gewusst, dass Mischigas hasert nicht über. Haben sie ihm gegleibt. Und so haben wir gehört, wie er sagt, noch einmal und noch einmal und noch einmal, hat sich nicht gelassen für keinen. Alleine haben wir gemacht, Redifes, man hat alles getan, hinterzubringen. Gefuhren sein, weil jeden Garten dreht. Ich gekickt, wer es sucht. Die größere Rebbe ist, die kleiner ist. Wenn jetzt immer bei uns nicht gewusst hat, der Mensch können machen, sagt, ja, wenn er das so scheinmatzlich sein. So haben wir gehalten, als Otto geht dahinter, Otto. Jetzt haben wir gesehen, Otto geht Klagisruhe hinter. Nicht er geht hinter, sondern Klagisruhe geht hinter. Und er schluckt er gefährlich. Er kommt auf unsere Gewirre, er hackte seine Raste sein. Das hat er sich gewusst. Und das verzeih ich nicht für jeden. Unbelievable. Und wir came to a point, jetzt müssen wir sagen, gerecht. Mit dem will man uns nicht gehen, weil er verschämt jeden Ruf. Aber er will es damit uns auch nicht gehen. Aber sie sagen, ja, der Mensch hat gefeit, tooth and nails, sie müssen auf Englisch. Und er hat mit so einem gar kein Bereich mit ihm. Jeder, der sich kommt sich anstellen, sie will ein Team für die Community, nehmen wir uns auf. Und ob es ist ein worthwhile thing, können wir es in sponsern. Baruch Hashem.